Hi, everyone. How's it going? My name is Liz, and I'm on the growth team at Divinity Foundation. And welcome to Community Conversations. So this is an opportunity for you, the community, to hear from contributors within the internet computer ecosystem, as well as ask some questions live. So today we have the OpenChat team doing a demo of the decentralized chat app, going over the architecture as well as some new features. And the team is comprised of Matt Grogan, Hamish Bugles, and Julian Jelfs. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Julian to kick things off.
Thank you. Can people see my screen, the slide deck there?
Yeah, I can see it.
Good. Okay, yeah, as Liz said, my name's Julian and I'm one of the OpenChat developers, along with Matt and Hamish. Start with a little bit of history. Matt, Hamish and I have worked together previously for quite a few years in our previous jobs, so we know each other pretty well. And that's one of the reasons we're able to move quite quickly and get things done quite quickly, because we know each other well and we can we don't have to spend too much time doing some of the ceremonies that are necessary in a larger team, which is nice. Matt previously has also worked in a number of startups with Dom, the Divinity founder, and that's how the Divinity link comes in. That's how we came to be working with Divinity. Matt and Hamish have been working on this since the early part of last year, working on a prototype for OpenChat initially. And this was before I was on board the team. And the initial goal here was to kind of help Divinity as much as anything to explore the limits of this platform, to figure out what can and can't be done, and to come up with good patterns and practices and architecture, and just initially figure out whether this kind of app was even possible. And the output of that whole process was the prototype system that is still available, the V1 version of OpenChat. You can still see that today. It's going to keep running for posterity for as long as we can keep it running. The code for that's now open source as well, if anyone's interested in looking at it. But we should bear in mind that there's probably quite a few practices in there that we would no longer consider a great idea. It was a prototype, so take it with a pinch of salt, have a look by all means, but don't necessarily copy everything you see in there. And then around summer of last year, I joined the team, and we three of us set about working on the proper version. And I say the proper version. The V1 we consider a prototype, is essentially running on a single canister, really. We'll talk a bit more about the architectural differences between the two versions a bit later, but the initial prototype was not really designed to scale. It was more designed as a proof of concept. So since the summer of last year, we've been working on a proper scalable version. And the goal here was to take all the lessons that we had from the first version and build something to last, so that we can iterate on that for the rest of its lifespan. And that's also involved collaborating deeply with the core Divinity team to help us overcome various problems and to point out various pain points that we've had and help improve the platform as we go along. So that's taken us a good 6 months work to do that. We were able to release this current incarnation around the beginning of this year, and then we've been steadily working on a roadmap of features since then, iterating reasonably quickly. And that's what I'm going to demo for you today. I'm going to demo the version that we're currently dealing with. And then after we've demoed it, we can look at some of the interesting things that we've got coming up in our roadmap, and some more interesting topics such as governance and monetization and things like that, which we'll get onto a bit later. Okay, I have completely neglected to move my slides along. That was who we are and how do we get here. So I'm going to need to do the demo in two different sections. Some of the features that I would like to demo make sense only really for a new user, and I'm going to demo those in our production test environment, because it's just easier for me to create users without kind of polluting the real thing. Once I've done that, I'll switch to the live environment, just so you can see things in a bit more of a real setting with real content and so on. Okay.
Sorry, Jill, it's probably worth mentioning that we don't have some special test environment. This is just another deployment on,
correct, yes.
on the sort of
so that, yeah, when we make changes to the system, we basically deploy to this kind of mirror environment, which is also live, just so that we can make sure that everything we do, broadly works before we push it out to the real thing. And that's what we're looking at here. It's a live system, but it is separate from the one that our users are using. Okay, so this is what you're initially met with when you hit the URL. So we'll go ahead and sign in, and that's going to take us to Internet Identity. So I'm going to show you the whole process, including creating a new Internet Identity, which is a little bit long-winded, but this is part of what I was talking about, where we kind of feedback pain points to Dfinity. We go through these kind of processes so that we can learn what's not ideal about them and hopefully help everyone improve the situation. Also there are other teams that are working on identity as a concept and specifically on smoother UX for this sort of process. Specifically, we have to enter a captcha here to get a new internet identity. But we're also going to have to enter another captcha when we arrive in OpenChat, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it's because OpenChat has no real way of telling that this principle came from internet identity. And we need to protect ourselves from bots as much as internet identity needs to protect itself from bots. So we've had a couple of iterations in this area. So once we come back from internet identity now, we're just going to be straight into entering a username. Previously, we would have a gate at this point. When we went live, we required a user to either register using a code that we sent them via SMS, or to register by making a small ICP deposit. And now the reason for this was because each user requires their own canister in our new architecture, and that obviously incurs a cost for us. So we want to be sure that users are real users, and that means that initially we achieved that using that code gate. So that was fine, it worked, but we learned quite quickly that there were a couple of issues with it. Firstly, not everyone is able to receive SMS codes. Users in China, for example, and not just China, other countries as well. Other people were sort of ideologically opposed to giving us their phone number, even though it was only for the purposes of sending them a code. And so we decided to try to kind of relax this rule and push this gate a bit further down the line. So now you can register by just entering a captcha, and then you're in the system. Okay, so that's us registered, and we can move on into the system. And this is what it looks like now as a new user. And it's kind of a bit empty, not much going on. So obviously the first thing you want to do is to basically find someone to talk to. And I'm going to go more into that when we get into the live system, where it's kind of easier we've got more groups that we can play with as kind of source data. But the things I wanted to show you in here in this test environment were the things that we can only really do with a new user. So just now I was talking about that SMS code gate being moved further down the line. What we do now is we allow anyone to register by just filling in a captcha, but they start off in a state where they have no storage. Okay, so storage is another thing that costs us money, right, as well as creating canisters. So we allow people to send any number of text messages, but we require people to either register via SMS code or, again, pay for storage using an ICP transfer if they want to send media messages. So we can see that if we go and look at the user's profile. I will come back to the user profile when I'm in the live system to show some other features, but really I'm just interested in this kind of section here at the moment. So we have these two options, as we can say, as an explanation of what's happening. I've got no storage at this point in time, so I can either claim 100 megabytes free by registering with SMS, or I can pay for storage using an ICP transfer. So if I click on this, another advantage of this being a test system is that I can just enter a dummy code. And that's another reason that I'm not doing this on a live system, because my phone number has already been used. So there we go, that's me simulating entering the code I've been sent. And at that point, this display here shows me that I've got 100% left of my 0.1 gigabyte limit of storage. And if I wish to upgrade that storage further, I can also go all the way up to 1 gigabyte of storage if I want to. And to do that, I would simply have to deposit the required amount of ICP. In this case, I'm asking for an extra 0.9 gigabytes, and that's going to cost me 0.9 ICP. So I'm just instructed to deposit that into this account. So I just have to go copy that account, and then the rest of that transaction would be external to OpenChat, and I'd have to come back in here once I've deposited that money. So those are the two ways that we can kind of upgrade a user, and it serves two purposes: to upgrade the storage and also to kind of verify that user, which is for us to use to prevent ourselves getting swamped with fake users costing us ICP.
Hey, Jillian, it's Liz. We have a question from somebody in the chat from Matthew. He is wondering, are you using Twilio for sending the SMS messages?
Hamish can answer that, I think.
Yeah, I was actually just typing a reply, but it'll be easier to say it. We have a little program running on an EC2 instance in Amazon, in AWS, which is kind of not really the route we want to go down, but it's all we can do for now. And so we have a canister that stores all of the SMSs to be sent, and this system running in EC2 just polls that canister, and then it pushes them out using AWS. Can't remember what it's called, but they have a system you can use for sending SMSs. We just use that for now. So that and notifications, actually, for both of those, we use an EC2 instance. But ideally, once canisters can make HTTP requests, we will stop doing that for notifications, at least. I think for SMSs, we'll still need to use something external. But yeah, we'll see in the future.
Okay, so I've still got no one to talk to at the moment. So the one other feature I want to show you in the test environment before we move on to the live environment is the creation of a new group. So we can do that from up here. That will launch this panel here, and we are able to, set a picture. That'll do. Name. This is a kind of free text box which supports Markdown. You can put whatever you want in here. A good thing to consider putting in here, I guess, would be what is the purpose of your group, or perhaps what are the rules of your group, what's going to get you kicked out of this group, that sort of thing. That's going to be visible to other people when they're making a decision about whether they want to join your group or not. Then you've got to decide what sort of scope you want your group to have, whether you want it to be a private group. If it's a private group, then you get to choose who you add to the group. That's the sort of thing you might have amongst kind of family or friends or something like that. If you have a private group, then you need to make a decision about whether you want the chat history to be visible or not. Obviously, you could get yourself slightly into trouble if you're bad mouthing someone, and then you add them to the group later if you've got visible chat history, so you want to watch it with that one. Or you could have a public group. In a public group, you're not allowed to add members yourself, because then you can kind of just spam people with the groups that you want to be popular. If it's a public group, people need to discover your group by some other mechanism and join of their own volition.
Actually, we will be adding the possibility to invite people quite soon as well.
Yeah,
so.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can just share the URL, or you can, something like that at the moment.
Yeah.
And then the final decision that you need to make is the permissions for your group, which I'll just go over now. So we have kind of three main categories of user. We have owner, admin, and member. So each group has one and only one owner. The owner can be transferred to a different user at a later date by the current owner, if you wish, but there must be one owner. Owners are allowed to do anything, basically, and they can create admins and whatnot. But then the other functions, it's up to you to decide what these different classes of user can do. So these are the default permissions, and we see that only admins are allowed to change permissions and change member roles and block and unblock and delete and edit group info and pin messages, and wherein all members are able to kind of send messages and react to messages and that sort of thing. So you can play with these, make changes until you're happy with the strategy for this group. An example of why you might want to change is you might want a read-only group, for example. You might want a group where you're simply broadcasting information to a community of people. And this allows you to do that if you want to. And so there it is. And then I've created my group, and I can, send messages from it. Okay. So that's all I think I need to show in the dev environment. So let's move over to the real environment. Now this is the real system. So I've got a lot of chats in here. As you can see, it looks a bit more inviting. We've got a bit more content. So let's think about how a new user might discover new groups. So we've seen how to create groups, but when you just recently joined, the first thing you're probably going to want to do is either find users or find groups. Let's think about groups first. There's a couple of ways that you can find groups. You can either search for groups using this search box, and that's going to, show you various things. It's going to show you anything that matches from chats you're already a part of, and it's going to find relevant public groups, and it's going to find relevant users and even relevant messages from the chats that you already belong to. That's good if you know what you're looking for. When you're a brand new user, you may not know what you're looking for, and in that case, we've got this recommendation feature, which we hope to kind of build on in the future. But at the moment, it's just a sort of very simple way to kind of orient people, give them some sort of idea of what's happening. So this is going to give you a list of popular groups for some value of popular. We can kind of refine over time what that definition of popular is. At the moment, it's just a sort of static thing that's the same for everybody, but it could hopefully in the future be more targeted to individual people, and maybe even people would be able to boost their groups if they wanted to, as a sort of premium feature or something like that. But this is a good place to come if you're looking for the groups to get involved with. So when you find a group that you like the look of, you can preview it. And then you enter this kind of special mode where you're not actually a member of the group yet, but you can have a look at the messages and sort of see if it takes your interest. And if it does, you can go ahead and join the group. And as mentioned earlier, you can have read-only groups. This one indeed is a read-only group. If I wanted to find out a bit more information about the group, then it's always a good idea to look up in this top right menu here, where we can see various things. We can see the details of the group. And this is similar to the panel that we saw when we were creating groups. It tells us the group name and how many people are in it and who owns it. We can click on the owner and see a bit more about them if we want to, and we can have a one-to-one chat with them if we wanted to ask them anything about the group. This is also kind of a useful thing in terms of moderation, I guess. If you had some problem with the group and you wanted to report it, then you could easily get hold of the group owner via this mechanism. And because we are not an admin of this group, we're getting a read-only view of all this. If this were a group that we had admin control over, we may be able to edit some aspects of this data, and it depends on those permissions. When we're looking at a group that we only have read-only access to, we're just going to get a read-only summary of the permissions. It may be that we're allowed to change these permissions for some groups. I can show you a group that that I created so that you can see what that looks like. So this would be one of my groups. I get slightly different options here because I've got a different set of permissions. I'm allowed to delete this group, and if I look at the group details, I can make changes to it. And I could make changes to the permissions if I wanted as well. Another thing you might want to do when you first arrive is make some changes to your profile, which you can do from the profile page. You could change your username if you wished. As long as it's unique, that's okay. You can enter a bio. That's something that people are going to see when they click on your user, for example, here. Hamish is busy building OpenChat. We can make some modifications to the appearance, and that includes changing language. So we're reliant on community translation for this, which has been great. We put out some calls for help to get people to help us translate into various languages. So if there are any linguists out there who want to see a language that isn't here, then get in touch and we will make that happen. Creates a bit of a maintenance issue for us, I guess, because as we add new features, then we have to keep adding new translations. So our strategy at the moment is to sort of fill in the blanks that we create as we develop new features with Google Translate, and then we just ask the people who provided translations to us to review those translations and give us any corrections. And that seems to be working okay at the moment. We can also change themes. This is the light theme that we're looking at the moment, or we can just choose to inherit system theme, which will kind of flip between light and dark depending on your OS settings. There's an original theme, which is kind of designed to make those people coming from the prototype feel at home. There's a similar color scheme and sort of layout to that version. Or we can have the dark mode where everything is dark. There are some chat-specific settings where you can control some of the behaviors within a chat. These are device-specific, I should note. So on mobile, for example, it's quite, it's a lot more normal because you're using a touch device that you're not going to be hitting an enter key unless you're sort of deliberately trying to put a new line. So this one was asked for several times to configure whether hitting enter actually sends the message or simply enters a new line. So you can configure that. You can switch notifications on and off here. Notice that this is actually kind of related to the browser's notification settings as well. So if you've got notifications switched off at the browser level, then you cannot switch them on at the app level. So if you ever find yourself in this position with this toggle disabled, then you may have inadvertently or deliberately but forgotten said no to browser level notifications. So just keep that in mind. I'm just gonna have to reload now to get the browser to forget that. Let's go back in here. And then there's some configuration around what happens when you select a chat as well. It's difficult to get something that meets everyone's expectations here. Depends on where people are coming from and what they expect it to do. It's pretty hard to predict. So some people expect when they select a new chat for it to automatically scroll to the first unread message that they have. That's not what we do by default. We scroll to the bottom, and then we just simply show you a button where you can scroll up to the first unread message. But some people just find that counterintuitive. So we have a couple of different options here that you can choose. And I mean, this, we kind of respond to what people feed back to us when we're deciding these kind of settings. Because obviously it's nice to have as few settings as you can get away with, because then it's sort of simpler, but you don't want to leave people in the lurch either. So then finally, we've got this account section here, which is showing me how much of my storage that I currently have left. And this will be consumed by posting picture messages or video messages or audio messages, things like that. And as we already saw, I can upgrade that up to 1 gigabyte if I want to. So that's pretty much everything in the profile section at the moment. So let's just think about messages themselves. So obviously, when we're within a group, we can enter text messages, as you'd expect. We can also enter audio clips, which is cool. Let's just make sure that works. We can also enter audio clips. We can share pictures. Video as well. I don't think I have any suitable video clips that are the right sort of size to show, but it's the exact same mechanism. We can mention other users by simply putting an @ sign, and then we'll get a list of all the people who are in the chat. And if I mention a user in that way, they'll get a special kind of notification, which makes it easier for them to see that they've been directly mentioned. We can do emoji auto-completion in a similar sort of way. If we wish to style our messages, we can use inline markdown. Nice. We've got some italics going on there. We can react to messages. If we particularly like a message, we can react to it. And we can add as many reactions as we like. And once we have reacted, we can hover over that and we can see who has reacted to our messages, as I can see that Matt's waving back at me there and replying to my message. We don't have edit of messages yet, although we've thought about how that might work. There are some, I mean, it's a tricky kind of thing from a UX point of view, but at the moment you can delete a message, which kind of is a way of achieving a similar thing. That will be deleted everywhere. We can just see that it was deleted. There are a couple of, well, there's one special kind of message at the moment, which is a poll. So if you have permission, you should be able to create a poll within a chat. So we can say, pose a question, and then pose a couple of answers. And then there are a few options here. We can ask people if we can set up a poll such that you're allowed to make multiple votes if we want. It doesn't really make sense for this particular poll because we want to know who the best is, not the best three. So, but that might make sense if you were asking, you know, what day of the weeks can you do for going out or something, then you might allow multiple votes. You can make a poll go on forever if you want, or we can limit the duration to a sort of one of these general time spans, and we can choose whether or not to show the votes until the end. And then that will appear as just as a normal message, and people can interact with it. You don't see anything until you've actually voted. So you can see at the moment, no one has voted yet. So as soon as I vote, my vote's registered and I see the ratio. If I wanted to promote this poll and get it in front of more people, I might choose to pin the message, but I don't appear to have permission in this chat. I can go to another group and demonstrate that. So if I wanted to pin this message telling everyone about this community conversation, I could just select that from this menu and get this little pin next to it. And if I open up the pinned messages, I should see it appear here along in the same kind of reverse chronological order as messages themselves. If you can have several pinned messages, that's absolutely fine. One final thing to mention is that all of this, whoops, that's not the right button. All of this works nicely in mobile as well. We thought about that from the start. So when you flip over to mobile mode, then, you know, everything has been thought through and works nicely. So we don't have to worry about that. You can also save the site to home screen in both Android and iOS, and it then behaves in a very kind of app-like way for you. Obviously, it's not an app, and people do ask us about when we will be developing an app quite a lot, and we hear that request. We understand, and it's definitely on our list, but it's not a trivial one. So. But you know, I think the experience is not at all bad on mobile as it is. We get notifications on Android, not on iOS, unfortunately, and the experience itself is good on mobile. So if you're interested in finding out if you have a burning question about OpenChat that you can't find the answer to, you can also have a look in our frequently asked questions, which we keep a collection here of things that people ask us quite often. So, you know, like I just mentioned, people ask us for apps quite often. So there's a kind of explanation of where we are with that, and for both iOS and Android, and various other frequently asked questions. So do have a look in there. And if you find something you want to know the answer to that wasn't in there, then let us know and we can add it there. And if you're interested in our roadmap, then you can have a look in this roadmap section. So this roadmap reflects kind of fairly low-level features that we will be developing over time. And when we started writing OpenChat, I think we had in mind that we were going to be building something along the lines of WhatsApp or Signal, you know, kind of small groups of family, friends, and one-to-one things. And so we based a lot of our roadmap and a lot of our aspirations around those sorts of apps, and have got a long way towards a feature parity with those. We're not there yet, but we've got quite a long way. But as we've come to run OpenChat for a few months, we see in reality that it is much more, seems to be oriented around large public groups, which is not at all the use case really for WhatsApp. And so that's going to inform our roadmap a little bit. It's going to probably make us move in different directions. Specifically, we see, that there are large groups that were started on a certain topic, and they might end up drifting away from that topic, or they might end up having people who want to talk about different things, and they're all in the same group because that's the only kind of building block they have. They have these public groups. So that's one obvious observation. We get these very large groups, and they probably start to break down at some point, or lose focus at some point, or even end up in some kind of conflict in the worst case scenario, where people just have totally different goals within the same group. So that was one observation we made. Another observation was that we had various discussions with other members of the community who are building their own apps, and they've often said to us that they would like a chat function within their apps, and they would like some way to integrate with OpenChat, because obviously it's a reasonably complicated thing and they don't want to spend the time doing it. And we haven't had a great answer to that use case. We think about what their options are. We say, well, you could create a public group for yourself. You can create a number of public groups for yourself if you wish. It doesn't quite meet their need, though, because those groups are public, obviously, and anyone can join them. So that's not necessarily what people want. They tend to want to create some sort of area for their own community. The other option they would have, therefore, is to create private groups. Private groups not quite meeting that goal either, because then it's the onus is all on the owner of the group to go find the people, to put them in the group. I think we always have the naming constraint with private groups. They have to be globally unique, which is not necessarily what people want. And then a couple of weeks ago, we also had
public groups have to be globally unique, you mean?
Right.
Private groups can be whatever name you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then a couple of weeks ago, we're having an internal conversation with Dfinity. It started by one of the Dfinity team to, posing the question, why can't we use OpenChat internally instead of Slack? So that got us thinking, well, why is that? Why can't we? And it's really the same problem. And the heart of the problem is that we need this isolated community of users that have the same structure that the global OpenChat instance has. And this just doesn't exist at the moment. There's no way for us to support this. So this wasn't a high priority for us on our roadmap, but it's become more high priority as we sort of see the way people are using the system and the way they want to use the system. So we are exploring this concept of communities. That's what we're calling it at the moment, which is essentially exactly that. It's an isolated community of users that internally can have the same structure as OpenChat, so they can create their own public groups, public within the community, or they can create their own private groups within the community, and everything else remains the same. It's just another layer of abstraction within the tool. So you could consider what we have in OpenChat today to be a kind of global community, and that will stay as it is, and there's no need to remove that. But we would then be able to support these other use cases, and that's going to be really important for us. We could say to a community, could be anything. It could be a group of people who speak the same language, or share the same interest, or live in the same city, or work for the same company. And so, thinking specifically about the Dfinity case, if we could do that, we could say to them, you create a Dfinity community within OpenChat, and then all of the things you want become possible, and the migration from Slack to OpenChat becomes a lot more realistic. This is both cool from a product point of view, and it's also good news when you start thinking about how do we monetize OpenChat, because at the end of the day, we do have to think about that. We have to think about how this can be a sort of viable business. I mean, it's got to be more than a cool kind of technical demo. And so this idea of communities, I think, can be one obvious way of delivering that monetization. we could, quite feasibly charge companies to have a private community. It's a model that's tried and tested by the likes of Slack and I think Discord to some extent with their premium features on servers. So we're quite excited about that new feature. It needs a lot of fleshing out. It needs a lot of thought exactly what is the relationship between communities and groups? Where do the settings lie? Where does the security lie? Where does the governance lie? All those sorts of questions. So that's going to be quite a large piece of work. I just wanted to call it out as I think it's quite an interesting new direction for us. But if you want to look at the lower level roadmap stuff, please do have a look at our roadmap section within OpenChat. And I think I better call it a day there, otherwise I'm going to take up too much time. So that's the demo. That's it from me. So I did have a few words to say about architecture. I'll just be very quick, I think, because we need to crack on. Like I said, V1 was a prototype. It was very simple in a sense. So it was a React web client, and basically there was just a very small number of canisters that were running everything. All the users on one user canister and all the chats on one chat canister, and then a little bit of a canister there to deal with WebRTC signaling, so peer-to-peer stuff, and then some AWS stuff to do with notifications. So that's where we're coming from. What we have today is quite a bit more complicated, but it needs to be in order to scale indefinitely. So we now have a Svelte front end. That's not really particularly significant. It could easily have been React. It just happens to be Svelte. Major differences are that we now have a user index canister and a group index canister, and these exist to manage the individual user canisters and group canisters. So each user has its own canister, each group has its own canister. And then there are some other peripheral things like a system for content address storage, which is provided by a tool called Open Storage, which is open source. You can potentially use that yourself if you like. And we still have some decentralized pieces that we rely on at the moment within AWS, the SMS stuff and the notification stuff. And also we are using a centralized signaling server at this point in time. These are all things, that box on the right, these are all things we would, in an ideal world, get rid of. But, that's going to take a little bit of time. I'm sure Hamish and Matt can go into much more detail about the architecture if anyone's interested, but I just thought I'd whistle through it and give you the high level. Right, so I talked a bit about some new features. I talked about communities, which we're quite excited about. I talked a little bit about monetization. I think generally speaking, our monetization strategy is important because we want to, we need OpenChat to be viable. We need it to be a genuine product and a genuine company. It's not what we're in it for to be just a demo. I am now going to hand over to Matt to talk about the next big thing that lies in our future, which is SNS governance. Okay, Matt.
Thanks, Julian. So later this year, as it becomes available, we'll be adopting the SNS, or Service Nervous System, which is analogous to the NNS, or Network Nervous System. This will enable OpenChat to become a community DAO, or Distributed Autonomous Organization. The OpenChat DAO will distribute its own governance token widely amongst users and investors, and the three of us will relinquish control of OpenChat to the SNS. From this point, changes to OpenChat can only be made as the result of proposals submitted to the SNS, which are then adopted by ballot of the token holders. This form of governance for an app is in its infancy, and it'll be really interesting to see the direction the community takes OpenChat. So I guess it'll probably feel slightly uncomfortable to lose control, but becoming a DAO should also provide us with some protection. For instance, once we introduce a low friction way of sending tokens like ICP as chat messages, we might attract the attention of regulatory authorities seeking to stop OpenChat. It would now be up to the community to decide whether or not to abide by a particular regulation in a particular jurisdiction. And as this decision is out of our hands, out of the hands of the development team, we would hope to be, to avoid becoming individual targets of sanctions. In addition to distributed governance and raising investment, the SNS will also give us the ability to tokenize OpenChat. Essentially, the aim of tokenization would be to encourage growth and participation in OpenChat. The more users we have and the more they participate in a positive way, the more useful it becomes to all its users. And there are various ways the DAO might choose to reward users with OpenChat tokens, such as referring friends, being an active user, creating and running communities and groups, moderating content, reporting bugs, and so on. And so then once users are invested in the success of OpenChat, we hope they'll become advocates and help to promote the service further. That's it really. So yeah, happy to answer your questions.
Awesome. So I know there have been a lot of questions in the chat box. I am going to throw it to the OpenChat team just because we'll be republishing this on YouTube and not everyone will be able to see chat. Okay, so first question, will there be an API for those seeking to build on top of OpenChat?
That's a good question. Potentially, we had the beginnings of an integration with these bot users that Jordan has been creating. So when there are proposals, automated messages going into chats that he's set up, this really happened organically. It wasn't something we planned, and it wasn't something we really thought through in any great depth. But it's a really interesting idea. That
incidentally, these are useful bots rather than, you know, when we said the word bots.
Yeah.
It's often a thing, but no, Jordan was creating good bots.
It would be difficult to expose the API that we actually use ourselves. I think it's going to be very hard for someone to understand. So I think what we would probably need some sort of partnership to kind of try and work through that. What is a good public API?
We'd probably build a client library that handles a lot of the logic, because we often have to call into multiple canisters. We do that on the front end because of the added latency if we were to do everything on the back end. And so, yeah, we could potentially provide some client library that kind of abstracts all of this complexity away from the end developer.
I mean, we could also potentially provide some sort of lower level UI widgets, you know, like a chat box or something. But
yeah.
I mean, it's something we've discussed with other people, but it's not something we've thought in any great depth about.
I mean, as it stands, there are sort of 100 APIs, are there 100 endpoints, something like that. It's quite a big undertaking, and then actually building the UI, trying to build the UI yourself, given the API, is a big undertaking as well. I mean, so Julian was talking about this idea of communities, and that kind of addresses a lot of the sort of problems of how can I get a chat for my community. You don't necessarily have to integrate it directly yourself. You can sort of create a community in OpenChat. And we would like to find some ways to be able to sort of share users between apps in that case, but that's the future.
But say you're an external app, you may want to have a widget inside your app, whereas the communities, the plans that we have for that, they would currently still exist on an OpenChat URL.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So the next question is, when will SNS implementation occur?
That's kind of out of our hands. That's the core Dfinity team building that, but I would guess 2-3 months. We're quite far removed from that, but I think that's roughly when it would be.
I think it's coming out in stages as well, isn't it? I think
we will integrate with it once it's available.
Okay, yeah, understood that it's like it's not within your control anyway, but I'm sure the community will be looking forward to it. So when do you think the OpenChat code will be open sourced?
Probably around the same sort of time. So once we move to being governed by SNS, I think that's roughly the goal.
It will
Yeah,
have
but
to
that
be
means
open source.
you'll have to
By
open source. Yeah.
for people to be able to make decisions on code changes, they'll need to be able to see the code. So we would open source it in the run up to integrating with the SNS.
Another question that I'm seeing in the chat is there any chance to have an Android or iOS version of OpenChat?
Yes, this is a frequently asked question.
Please can refer you to the answers in the frequently asked questions section.
There are different categories of reason for wanting this. I think some people just like the feel of an app, the sort of fluidity of an app, which is kind of hard to recreate. And for that, to achieve that, we would really have to write something native, and we wouldn't really be able to wrap what we've got. That's one reason. And another reason for wanting an app is so that we can gain access to platform APIs, such as Contact API, such as push notifications on iOS, and a bunch of other stuff probably. Now, to meet that goal, we could potentially wrap the web app in some bridge that gives us access to those native APIs, and then package it up. The problem with that is that it probably won't satisfy the people who want an app because they think it's going to be nicer, because it probably will be much the same. And then the issue with doing it from fully native is that it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work in a technology that we don't have a huge amount of experience in. Add to that the possibility that we've had dangled before our eyes recently, that Apple may indeed be bringing push notifications and other PWA sort of features into iOS in the not too distant future. That takes away one of the really important reasons why we might write an app. So it's like, we definitely know people want it, but it's a big deal for us to do, and there are a lot of other things we want to do. So it's a balancing act.
One potential way that it could be done is, once we're open source and we've got these tokens, we could give a bounty for some external team to build iOS apps or Android apps. And, if they're willing to do it, we can give them a big bundle of OpenChat tokens.
If that's what the community wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And same with any developers who get involved, if they build out a feature or fix some bugs, then we would reward them with bounties.
But yeah, just before you decide that we need an app, just give it a go, saving it to home screen on your phone, and try it for a bit, because that's what I use on my iPhone, and it does feel quite app-like, and I think it's even more app-like on Android, where you get notifications as well. So if you haven't tried that, try it. If you have tried that and you still want an app, you're probably always going to want an app. So I understand.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So the last question for today: have you guys considered building an OpenChat SDK so that developers could integrate their own OpenChat into their dApps? Trollbox was a really interesting use case for Poloniex, and this could be a great tool for app developers.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it just now. I think that is a great idea, but again, there's only 3 of us, so we just have to pick our battles. I think if we get this communities concept out, it will help a lot of people with what they're trying to achieve, and then we see what's left, what use cases are not being met. I definitely think that's a really interesting idea, but it's going to be there's so many different ways you could try and do it. We're going to have to be careful, and we're going to have to spend a lot of time gathering information of what people are actually really trying to do, and make sure we get it done the right way, whether they want their own UI, whether they want their own user community, whether they want to be able to have all the full features, you know, or group creation, everything, or do they just want a chat window on their site to talk to other people on the site? There's a lot of different levels at which we could try and do it. So yeah, it's another big job.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. Would you guys ever consider maybe fundraising or, you know, trying to get some of the financial resources to expand the team to implement some of these features that the community is requesting?
I think, yeah, like manpower is only half the problem. Like we one of the things we like is the fact that there's only 3 of us, because it does allow us to get things done very quickly. And also we know each other well, and we know what we're capable of, and we know that if we need to clarify something, it's going to be a 5-minute conversation. It's not going to be a 4-hour workshop that drives everyone nuts. And we definitely want to preserve that. So sometimes it's going to just, you know, having more people will slow us down and will be counterproductive. So we definitely open to that possibility, but with some trepidation. I think we want to do it carefully.
Yeah, I totally understand. I think there are trade-offs with a smaller team versus having more resources. I think another reason why this SDK question is interesting is because when I think about, you know, some of the chat apps that I use, or chat, whatever, yeah, I guess app's the right word, that I use just like outside of the blockchain world, a lot of the times that functionality is integrated into like some kind of broader ecosystem or some kind of like broader app. Like say, for example, you know, when I'm on Twitter, one of the features I use the most is sending and receiving DMs. Even something like Facebook Messenger is part of like the broader Meta ecosystem. iMessage is part of the broader Apple ecosystem. So I definitely think that this sort of chat functionality for the IC would be so interesting on Discover, for example, or you know, any sort of like other applications in their ecosystem, or like if there's a blockchain game based on the IC, if there's some way to integrate OpenChat, so that was like, you know, that was like the technology used to communicate in game. I think that would be a major use case for OpenChat.
Yeah, I think building out these communities is just the first step to reaching that goal. So once we've got the communities, we can then have an SDK, and then external teams can have their own community and interact with it through the SDK. But we need these communities before it's worth having the SDK.
Absolutely.
So,
I don't think,
you know, we'll get
yeah,
there. We'll get there.
Totally. Yeah, I don't think the tail should wag the dog either. So I know that we're at time, so I wanted to give a big thank you to our speakers today. So Julian Jelps, Hamish Peebles, and Matt Grogan. Thank you to the audience for tuning in and for all of your wonderful questions today. Definitely feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. If you have any questions for the speakers, I'm happy to answer them async and field them over to the speakers. And I will see you guys at a future Community Conversations. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Take care.